Howdy everyone, it's me once again, the one and only Killer Dan. So I figured for today's video I would review another book, of course. Since I've covered novels before, this is technically a collection of comics, I guess. But these comics were originally sold separately but then put together, of course. And it's the Hack and Slash series. And this is volume 1, by the way. And I just thought I'd just talk about this because, for one, it gives me an excuse to talk about something slasher related. I like the cover though. The cover is pretty straightforward in a lot of ways, but I do like the overall design. It's not too crowded or anything, so nice cover though. So anyway, the people behind this actually did a pretty good job. Of course, the writer, designer, and all that, the production, designer and whatnot. And pretty much there was like an entire team behind this, of course, who wrote the individual issues before being collected into this collection. As I'm saying, so yeah, quite a few people. The people who did the coloring, the inking, and all that. Did quite a bit actually. So there's that, I reckon. So anyway, whatever. Of course, as always, let's just get into the plot, shall we? So here we go. Of course. Anyway, but yes, this is definitely one of those types of stories where things are not so pleasant. The horror theme thing. It's a slasher themed kind of thing. Hack and Slasher is a horror action comic series that follows this young girl, this young woman, I should say, who pretty much dedicates her life to hunting down and killing specific individuals. These threats, of course, and these threats must be taken care of course, obviously. And yes, we can see our main character is this woman here. The story, I guess this is pretty much an origin story, obviously. It pretty much begins by illustrating that our main character has a tragic past, pretty traumatic, and she was a survivor of her mother's murderous rampage, which was triggered by her mother's obsession with horror movies and serial killers and whatnot. There's a bit more to it than that, of course, because her mother was pretty crazy, of course, pretty insane, of course. Yeah, something was definitely off by the mother. The tragic history past fuels her main character's mission to dedicate herself fighting against similar threats, I guess you can say. And she wants to do her best to do the right thing, obviously, in her own way. And yeah, things get pretty crazy, as you may expect, as they should, obviously. So yeah, so this is definitely one of those kind of stories where, in this case, our main character not only survives, she then turns the tables by hunting down and destroying the horrible people, of course, that would do harm to the innocent, of course. So there was that. And this is definitely one of those type of stories where, yes, while the main character is a woman, of course, but the film doesn't make it into some kind of like man hating kind of story, so it's not that. So I know people immediately assume that, of course, like some kind of anti man hating kind of story. That's not the case here at all. She's just had a terrible upbringing, really awful, of course, but she wants to do something in real life. There's a bunch of other stories going on here, of course, plenty of other stories, but the general idea, we all know about the final girl when it comes to these slasher movies, but let's say the final girl pretty much goes against these slashers, so it pretty much flips the script, and yes, she's a goth character, and I guess trying to make this a bit more original in some ways, I guess, and whatnot, and just trying her best to take care of the evil people that's out there, of course, and yeah, I'm gonna definitely say that, folks. Of course, that's how it is. And she's pretty tough in her own ways. And considering what habits are, she kind of just has to be tough as a result of this. She has no choice, really. But yeah, this is definitely going on the upbringing she had, which, again, like I can't stress this enough, was pretty horrible, I guess you can say. So, yes, when she was much younger, her experience was not very good. I mean, I know some people might argue that, of course, she's going to be rebellious, of course, on all that. She's going to break the rules and go against social norms, yada, yada, yada. Yes, I know a lot of people might argue that. That seems like kind of typical for a goth character, but the way this is written, it's trying to be his own take on that kind of thing. You know what? Even though it might feel a bit cliche to some extent, but I did like what the stories were trying to do here, folks, of course. Oh, yeah, one thing I should have mentioned earlier, but is that as she, of course, has to witness this blood and guts, of course, and whatnot. And yeah, it's bloody. Things get pretty violent, obviously, of course. And but I was gonna say that the one thing I wanted to say here, of course, she's not alone in this. She does have a partner in crime, so to speak. Because well, yeah, there's this giant individual. He's an outcast and whatnot. She's getting some assistance from him, and they're going around, going after the slashers and whatnot, and just taking care of business, so to speak. And as they should, I suppose. And it's just their thing they're trying to do here, and just I guess fix up society in their own way, of course. And yeah, she's pretty limber in a lot of ways. She's pretty tall, of course, and whatnot. And she just wants to make sure she takes care of business in her own way. And yeah, that's what's going on here, of course, with this kind of a thing. So yes, obviously, in pretty much she has this friend, and then the whole slasher threats. Her journey introduces her to that giant character, the really tall guy, her loyal companion and friend, who is a wisecracking zombie-like creature. Together, they will hunt down various slashers and other monsters. This volume pretty much presents several standalone stories as well, like I was saying a moment ago, each featuring different horror icons, slashers, and whatnot. So that's definitely a thing here, folks, of course. And build the horror tropes with humor, trying to do its own spin to it, of course. So there was that. Obviously, trying to do its own thing, yes, but kind of builds upon the familiar, trying to create its own atmosphere throughout this entire thing, of course. And as it should have, obviously. Oh yeah, another thing I would say is that speaking of slashers, yes, even Chucky makes an appearance in this. Yes, he's in this actually for a little bit. Does this mean that this movie is these movies are canon to the books? I mean, a little confused. I'm gonna guess yes, maybe. I don't know. Even though these books were never referenced to any of the movies, though. But whatever, guys. So anyway, when it comes to victims and monsters, this entire volume here, our main character encounters the various victims, survivors, and monsters. These stories within this volume often serves as a commentary on horror film cliches and slashers. And of course, our main character is going to have like a no nonsense attitude, constructing with the craziness of the villains she fights, of course, and whatnot. I mean, yeah, there's gonna be like a main villain, of course. The overarching plot involves her facing off against, uh, I guess you can say, a new mysterious slasher in here who embodies the worst excess of, I guess, horror cliches, I guess. And this, I guess, this villain is a reflection of the series, I guess, own take on the horror villains in some ways, of course. When it comes to the themes and tone of this volume, it balances humor and horror, of course, elements with dark humor and satire, often poking fun at horror tropes by paying homage to them. Explores trauma, of course, which, yes, exploring trauma can be extremely sensitive in a lot of ways. I'm aware, folks, before anyone says anything, absolutely yes. Exploring trauma is extremely sensitive and a complex process. It does, of course, often involves comforting painful memories, emotions, and of course experiences that can be very overwhelming and challenging to face when it comes to people. I mean, yes, some people can handle it better than others. That's true. Creative works like hack and slash can sometimes approach trauma through themes of recovery, resistance in a lot of ways, and of course covering past horrors, which can be both cathartic and thought provoking for readers. And if done I've done carefully, of course, which, yes, I will understand, of course. And yes, but for this volume I'm talking about here, it includes the first several stories just in the collection, as mentioned earlier, folks. So even though, like I just said earlier, folks, excuse me if I'm repeating myself here, is that even though a lot of these issues were sold separately, but since this got popular enough, it was put together in one book, of course. Anyway, I mean, yes, there are some standalone horror stories that parody and play homage to classic horror films that take place within this overarching story. That is true. And yeah, we just get to see that in this volume of Hack and Slash, it shows that our main character, her backstory, and her mission pretty much set up everything. And yes, there's also a recurring subplot within this volume involving her past and her relationship with her mother, who, like I said, was this notorious slasher type of individual. Sure, there was that going on, of course. But yeah, it's just, there's that. As I mentioned before in other videos, I know that horror does have a bad rap, unfortunately. And yes, of course, horror films and horror stories obviously is depicted as something not very creative, unfortunately. But it doesn't seem to be a biased statement, if you ask me. Just because something is gory, just because something is violent and horror related, does not automatically mean is a void of creativeness, which of course I mentioned quite a few times before. But anyway, does it help if it's within horror when it comes to a trauma thing? And okay, that's a thoughtful question. Exploring trauma within the context of horror can actually be helpful, in my opinion, and complex if the execution is done properly. Yes, of course, for some people, horror stories, whether it's in books, movies, or comics, serve as a way to process complex emotions in a symbolic or controlled environment. Of course, they can provide a safe space to confront fears, examine trauma, and find a sense of, I guess, empowerment through the narrative. In some kind of way, horror can often touch on themes of vulnerability, fear, and survival, of course, which can originate deeply within personal experience of trauma. When done thoughtfully, of course, it can help individuals feel less alone, see if their struggles reflect on fictional stories through the main character, and yes, even get a sense of urgency and hope through characters overcoming monsters or adversity, whatever that may be, I guess you can say. So, however, for others, yes, of course, I do recognize that horror itself can be triggered or intensify feeling of fear or distress, especially if it touches upon a specific traumatic experience. Of course, it's important to approach this kind of a exploration with awareness of your own boundaries, of course, and emotional states, of course. And yes, it can be done carefully, of course. And all in all, I mean, I have to say that real quick, of course, folks. If anyone who's watching, if you find that horror helps you process or understand your own feelings, that can be a very meaningful part of your healing process. But also, prioritize your own well-being. If something helps you to overcome, it's okay to pause, seek support, or maybe find different ways to cope with certain things and heal. You, your well-being is very important. But anyway, let me just wrap this up, folks. And not all these types of videos that tend to be long when it comes to reviewing books, well, sometimes in a way, especially comics, I guess. Anyway, I can say that this was definitely well made. I like the artwork. Also, I mean, I did have some issue with some of the artwork. Some of the artwork I did not like really, but the artwork as a whole is very good. I like the writing. The writing is really strong. I liked how it's executed with the writing, of course. And like I said, the artwork and the writing go hand in hand. Since graphic novels are a visual medium, the artwork is really nice for the most part. Like I said, some of it I don't care for, but for the most part, the artwork is pretty nicely done. Anyway, I can definitely say the artwork was really good. I like the detail. It does have the goth feel to it when it comes to this kind of thing. And yeah, it really does help with the horror theme as a whole, of course. And yeah, The writing, like I said, the writing is really good here. Yeah, what do you know? Horror stuff can have good writing, can have good be good in writing. Yes, comics. I know a lot of people believe that comics are just for kids, which of course is a biased statement. A lot of people believe that horror stuff can have good writing, which again is very biased. Anyway, folks, like I said, let me just wrap this up because I think this has been going long enough. I could go on and on, but I don't want to spoil it too much, really. It gets an overall rating of a 7.3 out of 10. It's a 7.3 out of 10. Thanks for watching, and take care. See ya. Oh, yeah.